The first dump truck rolled over my cattle guard at 6:12 a.m., spraying red dust across my private ranch road like it owned the place. Behind it came 3 HOA SUVs, 2 contractor pickups, and a white Mercedes with Silver Pines Estates decals on the doors. Their tires were grinding through the only access road I owned, the one that controlled every gate, every turn, and the only bridge leading into their subdivision's back entrance. Diesel fumes drifted over my porch. A new metal sign had been bolted beside my fence overnight. Community Access Road. Then a second crew started cutting the chain off my west gate. That was their first real mistake. They weren't just crossing my land anymore. They were touching the control point for 1,200 acres, a private bridge, and the only route their emergency plan depended on. I stood barefoot on the porch with cold coffee in my hand, listening to bolt cutters bite steel. The sound was sharp, clean, final. A man in a yellow vest looked up at me and waved like I was the inconvenience. Then the Mercedes door opened. Victoria Langford stepped out in white slacks, sunglasses, and that polished HOA smile people use when they already think they've won. "Mr. Caldwell," she called, holding a clipboard against her chest. "This road serves the community now." I looked past her at the tire tracks. They crossed my gravel, my fence line, and the survey stake I had paid to set 2 weeks earlier. The little orange flag was bent flat in the dirt. That mattered. More than she knew. I said, "You're on private property." Victoria's smile didn't move. "Our attorneys disagree." She said it loud enough for the contractors to hear. One of them laughed under his breath. Another started unloading traffic cones. The cones were orange and bright against the morning dust. They looked ridiculous sitting on a ranch road my father used to drive with hay bales stacked to the sky. "My name is Ethan Caldwell. I spent 20 years building roads, drainage cuts, and bridge approaches across 3 states. I know what a public road looks like. I know what a private easement looks like. And I know when someone is trying to turn theft into infrastructure." Silver Pines Estates sat east of my land, all stone mailboxes, fake lakes, and identical beige roofs tucked behind iron gates. My property wrapped around their western edge like a horseshoe. I bought it because it was outside their HOA. That was the whole point. No board. No fines. No clipboard queens measuring grass. Just 1,200 acres, an old ranch house, a narrow bridge over dry creek, and silence so deep you could hear wine move through cedar branches. That morning, the silence was gone. Engines idled. Radios crackled. Gravel popped under tires. A security guard in a golf cart rolled up beside Victoria and handed her a stack of papers. She tapped them twice, then held them out like a judge's order. "Temporary access notice," she said. "You are obstructing a community corridor." I didn't take the papers. I watched the contractor near my gate instead. He had the chain loose now. The steel dropped into the dust with a dead clank. My jaw tightened. Victoria mistook my silence for fear. "If you interfere," she said, "Silver Pines will sue for damages, emergency access restriction, and loss of property value." A third SUV rolled past us, filled with residents staring through tinted glass. They were already using the road. Not asking. Using. That was the second escalation. They had brought witnesses to trespass. Then Victoria pointed toward my bridge. "We'll also need that widened." The air went still around me. Even the guard stopped moving for half a second. That bridge was not decorative. It was the only load-rated crossing on the west side. It sat on my land, tied to my gate system, my drainage plan, and my insurance. Victoria had just claimed the road, the gate, and now the bridge. I looked down at the bent survey flag in the dirt. Then I looked at her clipboard. This was no neighbor dispute. Victoria had arrived with crews, signs, guards, and lawyers. Then the first lawsuit notice hit my chest. The envelope slapped against my shirt and slid into the dust at my feet. Nobody spoke for a second. The contractors kept working. The security guard looked away. Victoria adjusted her sunglasses and acted like she had already won. I bent down and picked up the lawsuit notice. The paper still smelled fresh from the printer. That told me everything. This had been planned long before the trucks arrived. Victoria turned toward her Mercedes. "You have been formally notified," she said. Then she climbed inside and drove away without another word. The convoy followed her out. Not all of them. 2 contractor trucks stayed behind near the bridge. That caught my attention. I watched them through the heat shimmer rising from the gravel. One worker carried a measuring wheel. Another was taking notes on a clipboard. They were not inspecting the road anymore. They were studying the crossing. That bridge mattered. More than anyone in Silver Pines seemed to understand. I walked down the ranch road toward Dry Creek. Dust coated my boots. The morning sun reflected off the steel guardrails my father and I had repaired years ago. The bridge was narrow but solid. Every beam had been inspected. Every support had been reinforced. I knew every inch of it. One of the contractors looked up when I approached. "Can I help you?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. "We are evaluating future improvements." "Future improvements?" "On my bridge." I nodded once and kept walking. There was no point arguing with hired crews. They were following orders. The real problem sat inside a gated subdivision with an HOA logo on every letterhead. By noon, half the neighborhood seemed to be using the road. Luxury SUVs. Landscaping trailers. Delivery vans. Even a moving truck rolled across my gravel. The crunch of tires never stopped. The ranch felt different. Smaller somehow. Every passing vehicle chipped away at the quiet I had paid for. Then came another surprise. A county utility truck pulled up near my front gate. 2 workers stepped out carrying maps. I walked over before they reached the fence. "Something I can do for you." One of them unfolded a document. "We received a request regarding future utility expansion." My stomach stayed calm. My mind did not. "Requested by who?" I asked. The worker glanced down. "Silver Pines Estates Homeowners Association." I looked past him toward the subdivision. Utility expansion meant they were planning for growth. More homes. More traffic. More dependence on the road they suddenly claimed was public. The picture was getting bigger. By late afternoon, I finally sat down at my kitchen table. The lawsuit notice lay open beside a stack of property records. Sunlight stretched across the room. The house felt unusually quiet after the nonstop traffic outside. Then I noticed something strange. The legal description attached to the lawsuit was not describing the road. It was describing something else entirely. I read the paragraph again. Then a third time. A cold breeze slipped through the screen door. Somewhere outside, another SUV crossed the bridge. The mistake was sitting right there on the page. I stared at the legal description while the last light of the day stretched across my kitchen table. The lawsuit claimed Silver Pines needed access through a section of land that was not even connected to the road. I traced the parcel number with my finger. Then I checked it again. Same result. The paperwork described a narrow strip near Dry Creek, almost half a mile from the entrance they were using every day. The silence in the room felt heavier than it should have. Outside, another vehicle crossed the bridge. Headlights flashed through my window. That detail stayed with me. Why would their attorneys file a claim against the wrong parcel? Lawyers do not usually make mistakes that expensive. Not when an entire subdivision is involved. I pulled a county map from the cabinet beside the refrigerator. The paper crackled as I unfolded it. Coffee had gone cold hours ago. I did not notice until I took a sip. The bitter taste lingered. Something was off. The road, the bridge, the utility request, and now the legal description. None of it lined up. Around 8 that evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mason Pierce. He owned the feed store 12 miles away. We had known each other for years. "You got company," he said. "What kind?" "Silver Pines board members. Half a dozen of them." I looked out the window toward the distant lights of the subdivision. What are they doing? Mason laughed once. Not because it was funny. Talking like they already own your place. That got my attention. According to Mason, several HOA board members had stopped by the feed store asking questions. They wanted road maintenance estimates. They wanted bridge load capacities. One of them even asked about widening equipment. My grip tightened around the phone. Nobody spends money planning improvements unless they expect control. The call ended a few minutes later. I walked outside. Night had settled across the ranch. Crickets chirped from the grass. A warm breeze moved through the cedar trees. Then I noticed fresh survey flags along the edge of the road. They had not been there that morning. Small orange markers stretched toward the bridge. Somebody had entered my property again after dark. That was escalation number 3. I followed the flags with a flashlight. The beam bounced across gravel and fence posts. Every marker pointed in the same direction, toward the crossing over Dry Creek. The closer I got, the less sense it made. Then I found a wooden stake near the bridge approach. A paper tag was attached with a staple. Engineering Review Area. Future Expansion Zone. I stood there listening to water move beneath the bridge supports. They were not planning access anymore. They were planning ownership. A pair of headlights appeared on the far side of the creek. The vehicle stopped. It did not cross. It just sat there with the engine running. After a minute, it turned around and disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, a certified letter arrived before breakfast. The certified letter was waiting in my mailbox before the sun cleared the ridge. The envelope carried the logo of a law firm 3 counties away. Expensive paper. Expensive attorneys. Expensive assumptions. I opened it while standing beside the gate. Morning air smelled like damp cedar and diesel exhaust drifting from the subdivision. The letter claimed Silver Pines had initiated a formal review of transportation access, utility integration, and emergency corridor expansion. That language was not written for a simple road dispute. It was written for growth. Big growth. I folded the paper and looked toward the subdivision. The rooftops caught the first orange light of sunrise. They looked peaceful from a distance. They were anything but. Around mid-morning, I drove into town and stopped at the county records office. The building smelled like old paper and floor polish. Ceiling fans turned slowly overhead. I requested every recent filing connected to Silver Pines Estates. The clerk disappeared into the back room. 10 minutes later she returned with a stack thicker than a phone book. That was not normal. I carried the files to a wooden table near the window. Most of the paperwork dealt with utility studies, traffic assessments, and future development plans. Then I found something interesting. A proposal map. The document showed a planned expansion west of the subdivision, directly toward my ranch. My eyes followed the colored lines across the page. Proposed roads. Future lots. Drainage routes. Utility corridors. Every path converged near the bridge crossing Dry Creek. The same bridge Victoria wanted widened. The same bridge her contractors had been measuring. That detail kept showing up. Nothing in those files happened by accident. An hour later I stepped outside with copies under my arm. The courthouse bell rang across the square. A warm wind carried the smell of barbecue from a restaurant down the street. Then my phone buzzed. It was Mason again. "You need to hear this," he said. His voice sounded lower than usual. "Hear what?" "Silver Pines held a board meeting last night." I stopped walking. "And?" "Somebody recorded part of it." My pace slowed. Cars rolled past on Main Street. Somewhere nearby a truck air brake hissed. "What was said?" There was a pause. "Victoria told residents the road issue would be resolved soon." "Resolved how?" Another pause. Longer this time. "She said the ranch owner would either cooperate or become irrelevant." I stood completely still. People moved around me carrying groceries and coffee cups. Nobody knew the conversation happening on my phone. Mason continued. Most residents clapped. The line went quiet for a second. Then he added something else. Not everyone. That mattered. It meant some homeowners were uncomfortable with what was happening. It meant cracks were forming. By the time I reached my truck, another thought had settled into place. Victoria was not fighting for convenience anymore. She was fighting for expansion. The road was part of a larger plan. The bridge was part of a larger plan. Even the utility requests fit the pattern. Somebody had decided my property was standing in the way of future profits. When I returned home that afternoon, a black SUV was parked beside the bridge. Two men in business suits stood near the railing studying maps. Neither looked surprised to see me. One of them folded his documents and nodded politely. Then they drove away without saying a word. But they left something behind. A rolled blueprint sitting against the guardrail. The blueprint was damp from the evening air. I unrolled it across the hood of my truck while the last sunlight faded behind the ridge. The paper smelled faintly of ink and fresh toner. Whoever left it behind had not intended to come back for it. My eyes moved across the drawings. Road extensions. Utility corridors. Drainage channels. Then I saw the label. Phase 3 expansion. A red line cut directly through the area surrounding my bridge. Another line followed the ranch road almost exactly. I stood there listening to wine move through the grass. The picture was finally starting to come together. Silver Pines was not trying to use my infrastructure. They were designing their future around it. That changed everything. The next morning I called the law firm listed on the lawsuit. The receptionist transferred me 3 times before a junior attorney answered. His voice sounded young. Careful. Professional. I asked a simple question. Has your firm reviewed the actual property boundaries involved in this case? There was a pause. Papers shuffled somewhere on his desk. Then he gave a legal answer that was not really an answer. That told me more than he intended. Somebody was moving fast. Too fast. Around noon another convoy entered the road. Not construction trucks this time. Real estate agents. I counted 4 vehicles. They stopped near the bridge and began walking the area with clients. One woman pointed toward the creek while another handed out brochures. The smell of fresh cut grass drifted from the subdivision. Laughter carried across the fence line. They were marketing future lots before they even controlled access. That was bold. Even for Victoria. I parked beside the gate and watched from a distance. Nobody approached me. Nobody asked permission. They acted like the outcome was already guaranteed. One of the agents gestured toward the bridge and smiled. I could not hear the words, but I did not need to. The body language said enough. Confidence. Certainty. Ownership. The problem for them was simple. None of those things came from reality. Later that afternoon, Mason called again. You sitting down? He asked. What happened? Silver Pines sent letters to homeowners. I walked onto the porch. The wood creaked beneath my boots. What kind of letters? They told residents a transportation agreement was nearly finalized. I looked toward the subdivision. There is no agreement. I know that. You know that. Apparently they do not. A hawk circled high above the pasture. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then Mason added one more detail. Some residents already paid special assessments. My grip tightened around the phone. Money changes everything. Once people invest financially, they stop questioning assumptions. They start defending them. That meant Victoria had created expectations across the entire neighborhood. Expectations built on infrastructure she did not own. Expectations tied to a bridge she did not control. Expectations connected to a lawsuit that was already showing cracks. The sun dipped lower. Long shadows stretched across the ranch road. Then I remembered the parcel number from the legal description. The wrong parcel. The wrong location. The wrong claim. I walked back inside and spread every document across the kitchen table. Maps. Surveys. Utility requests. Expansion plans. Blueprint copies. One detail suddenly connected all of them. And once I saw it, I could not unsee it. The county map revealed something Victoria never should have overlooked. The county map stayed open on my kitchen table long after midnight. A single desk lamp cast yellow light across the paper. Crickets hummed outside the screen door. Every document I had collected was spread around me in careful rows. Survey records, utility applications, expansion plans, lawsuit filings. I followed the lines again. Then again. The answer had been sitting in front of me the entire time. Silver Pines was planning growth westward, but the subdivision did not actually control legal access to the expansion area they were advertising. The road they wanted was important. The bridge was important. But neither was the real target. The real target was continuity. Every future phase depended on a transportation corridor crossing my property. Without it, the expansion maps became expensive drawings on paper. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the refrigerator hum. Suddenly the wrong parcel number made sense. It was not a mistake. It was a shortcut. Somebody had tried to create leverage before securing the infrastructure they needed. That realization changed my approach completely. The next morning I hired an independent surveyor named Carl Benson. Carl was 60 years old, stubborn, and obsessed with accuracy. Exactly the kind of person I needed. By noon he was walking the property with a GPS unit mounted on a pole. The device beeped softly as he moved through the grass. We spent hours checking markers, boundaries, and easement references. Dust clung to our boots. The Texas sun reflected off the creek below the bridge. Carl rarely spoke while working. That was normal. Around 3 in the afternoon he finally stopped near one of the orange survey flags Silver Pines had installed. He crouched beside it, studied the coordinates, then looked up at me. "This should not be here." Those 4 words carried more weight than a courtroom speech. I watched him pull another map from his truck. He compared coordinates, checked measurements, then compared them again. The flag was not marking a transportation route. It was marking land outside the area described in the lawsuit. Land connected to future development plans. Land they had never disclosed publicly. My pulse stayed steady. My thoughts did not. Someone had moved beyond access claims. They were preparing for something larger. Carl continued his survey until sunset. Before leaving, he handed me a preliminary report. "Keep copies of everything," he said. "You may need them sooner than you think." That night another homeowner called me directly. I recognized the number from Silver Pines. The woman sounded nervous. Her voice shook slightly. She explained that residents were being told construction would begin soon. She said people were excited. Property values were expected to rise. Then she lowered her voice. But nobody can explain how they got permission. I thanked her and ended the call. The silence afterward felt important. Questions were spreading inside the subdivision. Confidence was starting to crack. The next day brought another surprise. A county planning meeting agenda appeared online. Most people would never have noticed it. One item sat near the bottom of the list. Transportation Corridor Review? Proposed applicant, Silver Pines Estates Development Committee. I read the line twice. Then a third time. My name was nowhere on the application. Neither was any reference to my approval. Yet the route shown on the attachment crossed land I owned. Someone had just taken their plan public. The county planning meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. 3 days away. 3 days for rumors to spread and assumptions to harden into facts. I spent most of Tuesday gathering records. Survey reports. Property maps. Photographs of the bridge. Copies of every filing connected to Silver Pines. The stack on my kitchen table kept growing. By sunset it looked more like a legal archive than a ranch house. The smell of paper and printer ink filled the room. Outside, traffic continued crossing the road. Not as heavily as before, but enough to remind me what was at stake. Around 7 that evening, Carl called. His voice was calm. That usually meant something important. "The preliminary survey is finished," he said. I grabbed a notebook. What did you find? There was a brief pause. The development route they submitted does not match existing access rights. I leaned against the counter. How far off? Far enough to create problems. That answer was carefully chosen. Carl was not the type to exaggerate. If he called something a problem, it was usually a serious one. The next morning I drove back to town. The courthouse parking lot was already crowded. Pickup trucks lined the curb. A city maintenance crew was replacing flags near the entrance. The metallic sound of tools echoed across the lot. Inside, I requested additional planning records. The clerk recognized my name immediately. That caught my attention. You have had a lot of activity lately, she said. I smiled politely. So I have noticed. She lowered her voice. You are not the only one asking questions. That mattered. Somebody else was digging. Maybe a resident. Maybe a board member. Maybe an attorney getting nervous. I left with another folder under my arm. The air outside felt hotter than before. By afternoon, I received 2 separate calls from Silver Pines homeowners. Neither knew the other had contacted me. Both asked similar questions. Had an agreement actually been signed? Was construction really approved? Was the bridge expansion already scheduled? Their uncertainty was growing. That was new. Victoria had spent weeks projecting certainty. Now residents were starting to look behind the curtain. Later that day I attended an open community forum hosted by the county. Victoria was there. So were several board members. She stood near a display table greeting residents with practiced confidence. Her white blazer looked flawless. Her smile never slipped. When she noticed me, she walked over immediately. Mr. Caldwell, she said. Still resisting progress? Her tone was light. The words were not. Still presenting plans you do not control? I replied. For a moment her smile tightened. Just slightly. Then it returned. Everything will be resolved soon. There it was again. Not hope. Not expectation. Certainty. She spoke as though the outcome already existed. That detail stayed with me. As the meeting ended, I watched her gather documents into a leather portfolio. One sheet briefly slid loose before she caught it. Only a second. Long enough for me to see the heading. Corridor Acquisition Strategy. Victoria noticed where I was looking. The page disappeared immediately. The smile vanished too. Then she turned and walked away. That was the first time she looked worried. The planning meeting suddenly felt much closer. Thursday evening arrived with heavy clouds hanging over the county administration building. The parking lot was nearly full when I pulled in. Residents from Silver Pines were everywhere. Some carried folders. Others carried printed maps. The low murmur of conversations drifted through the humid air. Nobody looked relaxed. Inside, fluorescent lights reflected off polished tile floors. The meeting room smelled faintly of coffee and copier toner. I took a seat near the back and placed my survey reports on the table beside me. A few homeowners recognized me. Several nodded politely. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Then Victoria entered. She walked in with 3 board members and 2 attorneys. The room seemed to shift around them. Confidence followed her like perfume. She greeted county officials by name. She shook hands. She smiled. Anyone watching would have assumed everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. The meeting began at 6 sharp. One item after another moved across the agenda. Drainage permits. Utility reviews. Budget amendments. Then the transportation corridor proposal appeared on the screen behind the commissioners. The room became noticeably quieter. A large map filled the display. Colored lines stretched across the landscape. Future roads. Utility routes. Expansion zones. I immediately recognized the route crossing my property. So did several homeowners. Whispering started near the front row. One commissioner adjusted his glasses and asked the first question. Do you currently possess all required access rights for this proposal? Victoria stood smoothly. Our legal team is actively resolving the remaining details. It sounded polished. Professional. Safe. The commissioner nodded and moved to the next question. Then another commissioner spoke up. Has the landowner agreed to participation? This time Victoria hesitated. Barely a second. Most people would have missed it. I did not. Negotiations are ongoing, she replied. Several residents exchanged confused looks. One man flipped through documents in his lap. A woman near the aisle frowned and whispered something to her husband. The certainty Victoria had been selling for weeks was beginning to crack. Then Carl stood up. He had arrived quietly and sat 3 rows behind me. The surveyor carried a folder thick with maps and coordinate reports. He approached the public comment podium. The room grew silent. Carl was not dramatic. He was precise. That made him dangerous. He calmly explained discrepancies between the submitted route and documented property boundaries. He referenced survey markers, coordinates, existing records. Every statement was supported by measurements. Every measurement matched county files. The commissioners listened carefully. Victoria stopped smiling. One of her attorneys leaned forward and began taking notes. Another started flipping through paperwork at increasing speed. The atmosphere changed. What had started as a routine review now looked like a problem. A serious one. Public comments continued for nearly 40 minutes. Questions multiplied. Answers became shorter. By the end of the session, residents looked less confident than when they arrived. Some appeared frustrated. Others looked concerned. As people gathered their belongings, I noticed Victoria standing near the side door speaking urgently with her attorneys. Her composure remained intact, but the confidence was gone. Then one of the commissioners made an announcement that stopped every conversation in the room. The review would remain open pending additional documentation. Nobody left immediately. Because everyone understood what that meant. The real fight was finally beginning. The weeks that followed changed everything. The county review triggered requests for additional records. More questions surfaced. More documents appeared. Every new filing seemed to create another problem for Silver Pines. I stayed quiet. I kept gathering evidence. Survey reports. Meeting records. Utility applications. Traffic projections. The stack on my kitchen table eventually filled 2 storage boxes. Then came the hearing tied directly to the lawsuit. The courthouse felt different that morning. Quieter. More serious. The hallway smelled like old wood and coffee. Attorneys moved between conference rooms carrying folders thick with paperwork. Victoria arrived with her legal team. She still looked polished. Still confident. But the certainty was gone. Residents from Silver Pines filled several rows behind her. Many were there for answers. Some were there for accountability. The hearing lasted most of the day. Maps were displayed. Surveys were reviewed. Property records were examined line by line. Carl testified calmly. County officials testified as well. Every document pointed in the same direction. The transportation corridor being promoted to residents depended on land rights that did not exist. The expansion plans depended on infrastructure the subdivision did not control. The legal claim depended on assumptions that collapsed under scrutiny. The most important moment came late in the afternoon. One of the attorneys presented the original access language connected to the corridor claim. I recognized the document immediately. It was the same chain of paperwork that had started this entire mess. The room grew quiet as the language was read into the record. Then came the clause nobody had been paying attention to. A provision tied to access rights and legal challenges. A provision that had been overlooked while everyone focused on expansion plans and future profits. The judge asked several questions. Attorneys scrambled through binders. Residents leaned forward in their seats. Even Victoria looked surprised. That was the moment everything shifted. The lawsuit itself had triggered consequences nobody anticipated. The very action intended to secure leverage had placed existing access rights under review. What began as an attempt to force control ended up threatening the route Silver Pines relied upon. The realization spread through the room one face at a time. Nobody celebrated. Nobody needed to. The facts were speaking for themselves. Months later, the outcome became impossible to ignore. Expansion plans stalled. New applications disappeared. Residents demanded explanations. Board meetings grew crowded. Victoria eventually stepped down from her position. The subdivision remained where it had always been, but the assumptions driving its future were gone. As for me, I spent that autumn repairing fence lines and replacing the damaged survey markers. The ranch became quiet again. Wind moved through the cedar trees. Cattle grazed near Dry Creek. Sunlight reflected off the bridge every morning just like it had before any of this started. One evening I stopped beside the gate and looked down the road. The same road everyone thought they could claim. The same road that changed the entire story. A new sign stood beside the entrance. Private property. Authorized access only. The metal caught the last light of sunset. I stood there for a long moment listening to nothing but the wind. Justice was never loud. It never needed to be.